All right, I think we will get started here. Thanks for writing in the emoji in the chat, having some fun in the morning or afternoon, wherever you're at. My name is Michaela Davis. I am a digital marketing manager here at Bidgely, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Before I introduce our speakers for today, we'll quickly go over some housekeeping rules. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Sriram. First, please ask questions. So there's a question and answer function within the Zoom webinar features. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, we will save them for about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to get those questions answered. Secondly, feel free to use the chat feature and chat with attendees, any comments that you have in there as well. And then after the webinar, there will be a post-webinar survey that pops up onto your screen, and would really appreciate you answering that survey. It's only a couple questions, and spoiler alert, both of the speakers on today's webinar will also be speaking at DTech coming up in February. So there will be an opportunity for you to set some time to meet with them there, or get calendar invites to their sessions at DTech. And also on that survey, there will be an option to subscribe to our webinars. So if you're interested in topics like AI, grid planning, EV detection, managed charging, SMB, and more, I'd recommend selecting yes to that question, and you will automatically be registered for all of our monthly webinars. And then lastly, a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared out to everyone that has registered for the webinar. And then next slide, Sriram. Without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce you to our speakers for today. We have Andrew Barrington and Sriram Ramanathan. So starting with Andrew, he is Avista's Products and Services Manager and has direct responsibility in unplanned outages, energy management tools, and billing and payments. He's developed expertise in service improvement, operations, business development, and customer service through 12 years of airport management. And we're especially thrilled to have him on today's webinar, as he is a great partner to Bidgely and has direct experience working hands-on with the tools that Bidgely provides to Avista. And our next speaker for today, you might recognize him from last month's webinar on AI, GPT, and the utility of the future. And if you haven't seen it, I will drop a link into the chat in a second. But Sriram is our Chief of Staff at Bidgely and works on topics as diverse as strategy, growth, packaging, and pricing. Prior to joining Bidgely, he headed a digital transformation research and consulting team where he helped launch and grow several services, including artificial intelligence and industrial IoT. In this role, he guided C-suite executives and utilities in other sectors and establishing digital transformation roadmaps, identifying scalable use cases, and monetizing digital products via novel business models. Sriram is a recognized expert in artificial intelligence and has been invited to chair and present at various AI conferences, and has also been featured as a digital thought leader in multiple business magazines. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Sriram.
Thank you very much, Michaela. Andrew, how are you doing today? Welcome to the webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. And so today, what we want to do is we want to talk about how you can seize the data as a utility company, how you can use your data to optimize your grid, to optimize your customer programs, and overall offer a very good customer experience for those who you are serving in your region or in your locality. So just to focus here on, to dive into the outline here, we want to start off by building the case for why there is some urgency around having to invest in big data, especially for the utilities industry. We are then going to try and understand how utilities can use big data to optimize customer experience and the grid. And that's where Andrew is going to jump in with his experience, launching some of these use cases, deploying some of these use cases, how these use cases have benefited his utility. And then we'll talk about, avoiding some pitfalls here. First and foremost is figuring out how to pick the right use cases to work with, right? People talk about AI all the time. It's in the news. I don't have to tell you this, but the number of failures are mind-boggling. Many companies don't even make it. And so it's important to understand how to pick those use cases. And then there are obviously other roadblocks that you face as you're trying to launch these products, to deploy these products. And that's where I think Andrew is going to jump in with, what are the roadblocks that he faced when he was deploying some of these solutions? And more importantly, how do you overcome these roadblocks? How do you pick the right vendors or the right platforms to work with so that, at least some of these roadblocks, if not completely eliminated, can be overcome with relative ease. So with that, I want to jump here, Andrew, into the background for this whole story. The current government, it's political season. It's a season of politics. We have a primaries going on right now, and the current government did a great job in terms of launching the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA. As a part of it, there are many different ways to add this up, but generally it's about close to $1 trillion that has been poured towards multiple initiatives such as, electric vehicle incentives, tax incentives for, adopting heat pumps, electrification, insulation, and so on and so forth. Overall, some experts estimate that all of these incentives together can reduce carbon emissions by as much as 1 gigaton per year. That's huge, still far away from our emissions targets, based on what the IPCC and all the climate experts are talking about, but definitely a big chunk, right? And this is also timely because if you consider, Andrew, and you will be very familiar with this coming from this industry, many utilities in the US and across the world are very aggressively adopting these ambitious carbon reduction targets. Many of them are promising we want to be net zero by 2030, 2035, and so on and so forth. So I want to pose a question to you, Andrew. How are you and your peers in the utility industry actually viewing this? Is this IRA something good? Is it posing some challenges? Could you possibly dive into what you think about the Inflation Reduction Act and its impact on utilities in general?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to talk today. And good afternoon or good morning to everybody. This is a challenging question because we are seeing a significant trend where large EV adoption is certainly happening. We're seeing a large customer solar interest, and when we start taking into that, if you have rapid growth, it's definitely putting stress on the grid, and it brings tension in, and by being able to just talk about it and understand, it's a positive step forward. Like you mentioned, Sharam, a lot of utilities have a carbon neutral goal, um, and as Avista does, and being able to just get ahead of it and be proactive with it rather than reactive is really the approach that I think a lot of our peer utilities have taken, as well as Avista. We continue to leverage our customers, see their interest, work with our community partners. You mentioned heat pumps. Understanding, partnering with our local heating and cooling, our HVAC contractors, to understand, hey, what are the customers asking you? Are they interested? Do they want to move to a heat pump? When we can collaborate with them directly, we just gain so much more insights to understand what our region and what our customers are adapting to. So it's definitely a double-edged sword. It's a good step forward, but it also brings a lot of stress and concerns to the grid.
Yeah, and I remember we were having a conversation a few days back, Andrew. I wanted to bring this duck curve, which I'm sure many of them are familiar with, and you were talking about the duck curve now becoming a giraffe curve. Explain to us, how is this duck curve becoming a giraffe curve, actually?
Yeah, I think the duck has been a great resource for this, and it's something that I keep hearing more and more of in our industry, and how the giraffe neck. So we have this peak in the afternoon hours, and in the evening, it's just going higher and higher as that late morning noon time frame continues to dip lower. With the enhancements of solar and how customers are using their energy throughout the day. And those are all just stressors that you have to plan for and be proactive with. I think most of the region saw a significant challenges over the past 2 weeks with grid demand, just with the extreme Arctic weather that the U.S. saw. In Spokane, in Eastern Washington, we were in negative 27 wind chill, but our highs were in the negatives for several days. And that type of stress on the grid, you have to be able to adapt for that, especially as we talk about moving away from natural gas and transitioning that over to electric. These are all brand new peaks that we're going to continue to see within, not just at Avista, but within our entire utility platform across the world.
Well, I'm definitely going to strike Spokane, Washington from one of the places where I want to retire. But going back, I think one of the things that concerns me is, and we have seen this happen repeatedly in like areas like Texas, for example, where this demand supply imbalance, which is what this duck curve really represents, starts like shutting down the grid in parts, and the power outages are costing the U.S. like billions of dollars, right? The economic impact of all this. But I'm kind of curious. We are talking about seizing the data out here. Andrew, how do you envision data being able to fix some of these problems? Maybe at a high level, you can talk about why is big data even needed out here, and then maybe we can start diving into the details a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And when you think about big data, you have to have a process and a plan on what are you going to do with the data. It's great to have all these insights, all these Excel files or PDFs or just thousands and thousands of lines of information, but you have to be able to have a plan. And I think what's important about that is it's not just a single individual or a single department. It has to be cross-functional. It has to be a conversation amongst your utility. And I'm proud to say that Avista has achieved that. We've got a lot of awareness around big data and how we leverage visually to our advantage. Yeah, I'm excited to share that today with this group, Sharam.
Okay, well, thank you. And your reference to the use of big data in utilities like really brings to my mind other stories, right? So as Michaela mentioned, Andrew, I was working with a lot of like CDOs, et cetera, and CXOs in terms of like helping with their digital strategy, their AI strategy. And so we were talking to people like across multiple sectors. And what is amazing is the parallels to other sectors. And the best example actually comes from your own backyard, Amazon, right? I should say it's a pretty sizable and very valuable backyard, if I can say that. But what they did was they pioneered the use of AI and big data as applied to the context of flow of goods, right? This was, again, the background here was globalization and shipping industry. Everything was becoming very complicated, and they brought in big data and AI. And I see parallels to like flow of information, Google jumping into that. And today we are talking about the flow of electrons here, right? We are talking about flow of electricity. And again, the same complexity, the complexity of generation, distribution, transmission, consumers becoming prosumers and so on. So it's really fascinating that big data AI can play a critical role. And in fact, this was the background, on which like Bijli itself was founded, right? This was a philosophy. The company was founded 10 years ago. And really, when we were founded, we were pretty much saying, oh, there are so many hundreds of millions of customers, and we need to improve the customer experience because that's what the world was all about. That's what Netflix and the iPhone was about. But over time, we have realized, as this energy transition is happening, that utilities are facing multiple problems. And so we have added to the product suite, and now we are tackling all kinds of problems, right? EVs, how do you detect EVs? How do you target EVs, right? Like figure out where they are, where these EVs are coming in. And in turn, what is the impact on the grid and so on and so forth. So, and again, I know for a fact there are other people who are tackling similar kinds of use cases using AI and big data. But I want to, and this is a very high level overview, but Andrew, what I want to do is pretty much hand the mic over to you to get your perspective on some really specific use cases that you have tackled using big data and AI, and how the ROI has been, how the returns have been, and so on. So let me pass it back to you, and perhaps you can start diving into some of the use cases that you've been working on at Avista.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to do that. I think just to build on that conversation, it's, when you see your customer base, there's this drive. The customer wants, I'll say most customers want this drive of big data. They want that insight. I can get Netflix can tell me what shows I should be watching because I watched a certain movie or a certain show, and customers expect that same level of experience from their utility, and it's growing. And being able to access that big data is so critical, and being able to take that data and make it so it's digestible from that customer is extremely important. And we've done a lot of these use cases that we'll talk about today. Some are internal facing, where our customers don't necessarily see the direct benefit until we go out and develop that plan and go and touch each of those customers. And there are some use cases where our customers are directly impacted and get to see how we're leveraging big data to help benefit them, their community, their neighbors. So yeah, we'll start with this one. This one's a great example. We've been leveraging Analytics Workbench since 2020, 2021 timeframe. And early on, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but early on, we had a hard time on getting cross-functional buy-in, right? I think with the utilities, we're all so very busy. We have so many tools available at our fingertips, some homegrown, some third party, but being able to ensure that you have that cross-functional team meet regularly to identify use cases. How can we take this data? What do we need to do with this data? And early on, we were struggling with, we had a pretty, I'll say an okay understanding of who in our service territory had electric vehicles. And what the use case was brought to us was, we need to understand what that growth looks like. Certain states, it's not as easy to get Department of Licensing information on your electric vehicles. It's a challenging aspect with personal information. So we knew we didn't want to necessarily go down that route. So what we were able to leverage here is, you can see the three bar graphs on the left side of your screen. Those actually indicate year over year growth. So we have 2021, 2022 in the middle, and 2023. We're able to see in just 3 short years, we saw a growth of close to 1,300, 1,500 vehicles come into our service territory. So, that's fantastic insights for us to understand that growth. And then we were able to even leverage it a step further and go, well, where are these customers? We were able to pinpoint them to specific substations, and even go more granular and get it to a certain feeder. So with this data, we're able to take that insight and understand, maybe we have a community in West Spokane that is growing 3 times faster than a community in North Spokane on EV adoption. So rather than having to enhance our grid across the board, now we can almost isolate where this is going to happen and start looking at different platforms. Instead of ripping the Band-Aid off and having to do everything, we can strategically start moving and enhancing our grid resiliency and just seeing that growth. So this has been great for us to be able to leverage and get down to that feeder and substation level. We have a pretty big desire internally to get down even further to the transformer level on data, so we can really start pinpointing where these customers are at on a transformer level. And we have this information on a customer level, but that's a one customer at a time type of a situation. With this platform, we're able to see all of our customers within a certain platform or a certain zip code.
And how easy has it been for you to gather this data, in the sense of how much do you have to drag your mouse and put data into an Excel sheet and make this chart? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question and a very important question. Um, I think the challenges early on were making sure our data was clean enough and accurate enough for it to be ingested properly. Um, but that's an automated machine now that just runs on a daily basis. So now that we've got that implementation set up, we're getting the data out and having it be clean um, is extremely easy. And when I say easy, I can pull years worth of data in this format, extrapolate it to a CSV file that's shareable into some sort of a presentation platform if that's necessary, all within 30 minutes to be able to have a list that's available and see that growth. So it's really intuitive. It's extremely easy to navigate, which has leveraged our team to make decisions quickly um, and have data that we're comfortable with and we know that's accurate.
Okay. And when I look at the substation data out here on the right, I see that, some of these substations, the power load, the demand load is, I don't know what, 5x, maybe 10x higher than the other ones, which to me is incredible, right? This is basically what we are talking about in the IRA initially. It's sprinkling the dollars and saying, oh, go buy EVs and so on. But unfortunately, that EV development is not that growth of EVs is not uniform across the entire territory, which is the assumption many utilities make, and probably somewhat of an assumption behind behind like this whole IRA saying, oh, who cares? Like the grid is going to be fine when the grid is not going to be fine, right? Like is that a fair statement out here?
Absolutely, and you can see that too. For those on the webinar, on the left side, those are our interval for charging time. So you can see we almost start seeing that duck curve already with our customer base. So, and you can see by year 3, it's shifted a little bit more. We got a little bit more charging happening during those noon hours, but there's still that same behavior. So that's another critical piece, Sharam, that you're able to see customer charging by substation or by feeder. And our hope is we can see that by transformer level in the future. So yeah, incredible insights.
Okay. Thank you. So maybe let's talk about another use case here that I think you might have built on that same EV problem that we were talking about earlier. I'll hand it back to you if there are other ways you're using this data.
Yeah, absolutely. This one was relatively recent and a lot of fun. We were struggling. Um, we struggle with identifying our EV customers, more so business customers, but that's something that we continue to work on. But our residential customers, they may buy an EV and they may not charge it at home. They may charge it on a level 1 charger. They might charge it at work. Um, so it's hard for our customer base for us to know what our customers are doing. And we had a program in 2023 that we were actually paying a pretty significant portion of the cost to have customers put level 2 chargers within their home. And this was it's an Avista owned charger. It allows us to kind of control usage, see how they're charging, just to learn that behavior. But we only had 700 participants
Mm-hmm.
in that program, and we knew we had more than 700 EV customers within our service territory. So we tried customer outreach, we tried doing surveys. Again, we didn't necessarily feel that Department of Licensing was a path we wanted to go down. So the team got together, and then we we realized this amazing platform we have within Analytics Workbench where we could take our known customer base, so our clean data, which we knew of. We
Mm-hmm.
actually uploaded that data set into Analytics Workbench, and we just kind of back engineered it. So we uploaded that user group, and then we told AWB to remove our known customers. So basically, just remove that list and give me what is left. And
Mm-hmm.
from that, Analytics Workbench was able to identify 1,600 additional EV customers who were charging on our system. So we were able to public or get corporate communication documents ready for those customers, marketing campaigns to share awareness about the EV tools and resources that we have. And so that was amazing. We were able to get that within hours of having our clean data to be able to provide a list of account numbers, addresses, their usage, what's their trending behavior. And what's incredible too is we're able to get this heat map also. So now we're able to see what areas, what zip codes, what feeders, what substations are, have the most growth. So again, it all just ties right back into um, understanding our grid, understanding our customers, and being able to leverage the tools that we have. And I continue to use analytics workbench with this larger group that we have here at Avista, and we call it our use case generator because we may have an idea. We don't really know what the goal is, but then we just collaborate and we talk about it, and then I swear it gives us use cases right back to us. So that's just a great example of being able to take the data you have and how can you elevate it even more.
No, it's really fascinating. It's the same EV use case you're talking about, but on one side you talk about the load on the grid, and thinking about like how understanding where that pressure on the infrastructure is coming from that whole demand from EVs. But the same data set, you're now using it in a different context where you're actually now targeting the right customers and sending them the right incentives and so on, which is kind of like how our vision has also grown. So if you remember, Andrew, I was showing like, hey, we started off 10 years ago focusing on customer experience, and then it has taken us some time to realize, the customer and the grid are two sides of the same coin. All the more so because as customers are becoming more and more of prosumers or using batteries and so on. And so we have also started bringing all that together. The other thing that stood out for me was, you talked about like being able to identify more EV customers using this data-based approach, this big data-based approach. But presumably it's also just in terms of the amount of time that it would have required for you if you had gone and said, hey, I'm going to manually go and identify everybody versus take the AMI data, just process it and right away get like a whole list of customers, like, bang, like within minutes or maybe a couple of hours, you have it already and at the tip of your fingerprints. But it's great to see that you're discussing this with your team, and you're also like trying to brainstorm new kinds of use cases that can potentially be targeted using that same data set. So why clearly the IRA is not just about EVs. We talked about like there's so many different pieces of IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. Tell me about like other use cases that you're working on now.
Yeah, this one's a lot of fun. We have something within Avista. We call it a named communities, and these are um, communities that are vulnerable, low income, and it's a really important thing for all utilities to be able to identify those customers and be able to support those customers the best way possible. And what we found here was pretty significant. Everyone's so focused on energy efficiency. We want to help customers achieve those rebates, save money, lower their usage. And what we were able to do here is it's pretty incredible. We were able to find through the heating efficiency, able to find what customers have very high heating efficiency versus very low efficiency on their heating system. And we primarily looked at heating. We also have done it and looked at it through a cooling aspect, but the heating just has such a significant impact on our customer bills. And when we looked at it, is we compared these customers, and we were able to identify almost 27,000 customers were considered a very low efficiency on their electric heating system. And what we found is with those customers, almost 50% of their bill during those winter months went to heating. And then when you compare that to somebody who has high efficiency or a newer home, or they've transitioned to a different fuel or a more efficient piece of equipment, that heating has dropped down to almost 28% of their bill is going to heating. So it's pretty remarkable. And our objective here was to be able to pinpoint, take that very low efficiency user group and then identify the top, maybe top 10, top 20, top 30%, and go do direct energy efficiency marketing to them, to one, for the biggest bang for the buck, right? We can get the best customers, the best upgrades for reduced usage and lowering their monthly utility bill. So this is a great example of just thinking outside the box. Everyone has energy efficiency goals. This is another platform we've been able to leverage to help us drive those goals. And who are we going to communicate with?
Mm-hmm. And you were mentioning something about named communities. Do you want to provide more context around what Avista did as a part of this to our audience here?
Yeah, and named communities. So that's just, again, one use case. And then, you know, you have the data that's already uploaded, and then we were able to generate another use case within a matter of weeks. This was an example of a federal grant that came through. This was a first test for us. We didn't apply for the grant, but we wanted to prove that the system would work. And we didn't apply for it just because of we had a bandwidth. We learned about it too late and the time frame to get this submitted. But just wanted to share the value that our team found with it. But we have this named community here, and you can see this named community is almost 40% of our Washington state customer base, or
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable or low income. And again, I get a heat map here that shows where those customers are located once I had that data. We had that data. It was simply account numbers that I was able to upload, and that upload takes, it's instantaneous. And then you're able to access this data and start playing with it to see what generates. But where this came in is there was this government fund or grant here for folks who had 275% higher energy bills compared to the national average. And we looked at this internally, and initially it was like, no, we don't have a way to identify this. And I was so intrigued by it. I remember kind of conversing with that larger group, and I said, let's just populate the list of customers we have and see what generates. We uploaded it, and then we started running algorithms, and what we found is we found several zip codes that were within this named communities that had customers that qualified or that would have qualified for this. So what that did for us is it immediately told us that we now have a solution that can help us with federal grants, federal funding, where we can pinpoint and have a plan, have an action on who would be receiving these funds and how can we do that best moving forward. So, this was, I love this story because we initially made a business decision. We don't think we apply to this. Our kilowatt rates are too low. Our customers don't have that high of a demand on usage. And we found homes that were poorly insulated, which caused that demand to go up. And not that we were able to just identify them. We were actually able to pinpoint their zip code, get to their meter ID, and actually get to that individual customer and provide a list on this customer within this named community would benefit from this federal grant and what we could do to help support them as energy efficiency, renewables, and battery storage. So lots of future opportunity. I'm really excited about this as we move forward and more grants become available for us to be able to generate those use cases.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to see what other new use cases, your team comes up with, just looking at the data, staring at the data. Because, some of these are really interesting in the sense that, I'm hearing it for the first time, like, oh, wow, this is pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
And what fascinates me is that you almost seem, it's not, so I've been dealing with, with a lot of AI and digital folks for a long time, like advising them what to do and so on. And many of these conversations across industries has always ended up with, hey, I have not seen the benefit of AI, but it almost seems to be the opposite here, that you have managed to actually see these benefits pretty quickly on your end. But regardless, like, what amazes me is, and this, I'm trying to switch gears a little bit here, trying to dive a click deeper in terms of what you experienced. But again, going back to the conversations I've had over the past decade with these people, it was always like, projects are failing, like digital is failing, AI is failing. And the statistics is like really mind-boggling. right? If you look at the statistics, and I don't know how familiar you are with, these are actually based on surveys that many people have conducted. 95% of like digital transformation projects fail. 90% of data science and AI projects don't even get deployed. People like build them in the lab, and then they're like, all these data scientists like, oh, I built this like cool use case. And then once they go out in the real world, it's not working, right? And then beyond that, even those that they deploy, people find it so hard to scale it across the organization or across, different sites that, only 30% are scaled. So if you kind of do the math here, what you end up finding is if you plunk in $100 million in these projects, you're going to probably see value for like a couple of $1 million. Like that's really, really bad ROI, which is not what I'm hearing from you, right? It seems like you had a lot of good experience, but kind of going back, I've had these discussions with a lot of clients, and one of the things we kind of, over time isolated is that a lot of these issues of failures happens because people don't pick the right use cases. And the way I identify these use cases, like what's the right use case to work on with regards to AI, is one is look at technical feasibility, right? Like, is that technology mature? Is the data available? Is the data clean? And is it complex, right? Or even the AI, is it mature enough, right? You cannot just throw some, random, like 30 years ago, if you had said, hey, go take a picture of all the power lines, figure out where the trees are, it would have failed because AI was not mature. Today it is, and today utilities are doing that. So there's that technical feasibility piece. And then the second piece here is the execution feasibility, which I think you referred to at a high level to some extent, things like stakeholder buy-in, data siloing, or for example, integration into your existing, MDM systems and your Salesforce and all that stuff, right? Like, so there's a lot of these different factors that go into determining whether that use case can be executed upon, like deployed in a successful fashion or not. And to me, this kind of breaks up like 4 quadrants, right? Like the lower left quadrant is basically low-hanging fruits. Your success rate is going to be super high, no matter what. Like you can mess up and you will still be successful. And the top right ends up being, loon shots. This is the autonomous car thing, right? Like we've been trying to do this for 10 years, but there's like either data issues or environmental issues or AI is not mature. And I call them loon shots. Basically, you got to be crazy to kind of do those things. So I want to like loop it back to, what you were talking about earlier. You seem to have had success with your use cases. So maybe dive in a little bit more, tell us like, how did you pick those use cases? What are some challenges that you saw, keeping this framework, as that background on which, perhaps you can share your thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I think a big piece too is just the cross-functional collaboration. Um, in my role, I'm heavily involved with our energy efficiency, heavily involved with our account and regional business managers. So, I get looped into a lot of these conversations where it's like, man, it'd be great if we could do this. And then I get to raise my hand and go, hey, I think we can. Um, so, all that does, come into play, but it's just so critical to make sure that you're not just siloing this with a single department.
Mm-hmm.
You have to share that awareness. And you mentioned data and how clean the data needs to be, and that's so important. Utilities do a great job with data. We have so much of it, and again, we just don't. There might be times where we just don't know what to do with it, or
Mm-hmm.
how do we extract it. I have this list of millions of lines. What do I do with it? And that was one challenge we did with that use case for EV owners.
Mm-hmm.
How do we ensure that we can get the data, get the known data? We have a list of known data, but how can we get it? How can we be confident in our own list? And then, one of the larger challenges with this use case was having the confidence that when we go communicate to these customers, they're not already on our known list,
Mm-hmm.
that they do in fact have an EV. Some challenges we had to consider. Did they recently sell their EV? Um, And then also challenges of like that customer may not want us to understand or know they have an EV.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely a delicate platform to walk on. But those are some of the challenges, is just taking that data and ensuring that it's available. One, it's clean and it's accurate. Sometimes a lot of that's all automated and we kind of set it and forget it. So it's important to make sure that you continue to stay up on that. Navista's done a really good job on keeping that data readily accessible throughout our company.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is a great one too, Sharam. The named communities. Um, this was a something initiative that we had recently started. Um, and again, it was a goal that we had. We got support with our commission, and you know, we identified it. We came up with the scope of what the named communities was going to be, and then you have all these ideas and funding opportunities, but then it just came down to, well, what actions should we take?
Right.
Right? We had this action list that was far longer than the funds available. So, and the team's working through that currently, but what actions do you take? And we were able to again upload that and really as a group identify, hey, these are the best actions we can take because it's going to have the biggest impact, a benefit for reduced usage
Mm-hmm.
to meet energy efficiency goals, and also it's going to reduce those customers' monthly bills, which is a direct benefit for those customers. So that's another really key part of it, is having clear objections on what actions you want to take. And a lot of that is just that cross-functional communication and just having internal discussions.
Yeah, which itself I have repeatedly noticed people struggle a lot. It's not just actions, it's also like defining the KPIs that would
Yeah.
define the success. And I think what's interesting is, the way our world has evolved, we have these like really clear KPIs for pure physical processes and products because we know what we need. We have these clear KPIs for pure digital stuff, but now that the digital and the physical world are actually merging, people are kind of struggling. Like, what is the KPI? How do I figure out KPIs on the digital side that impact the physical, or vice versa, which is the big challenge. I think you also talked about like this idea of, building a resilient grid. You talked about one of the use cases. What are some of the challenges that you face there?
Yeah, this is great. I am a huge fan of the 8760, which allows us to leverage um, an hour of every day to be able to see this over the course of a year period. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and this was, we have some grid planning folks on that cross-functional team who have provided some great insights and enhancement requests to help them in their role that can be utilized through the Bidgely tools that we leverage today. Um, and you trying to understand what that growth looks like. We now have an opportunity to again generate those use cases where we can help forecast.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have, we work a lot with Mary with Bidgely to understand what does it look like if we continue to see an 11% growth on EV. What
Mm-hmm.
does that look like on our grid in the future? But again, coming back to some of the challenges is this is another tool, and we have so many tools that we use within the industry um, that it's hard. That could be one of the biggest challenges, is making sure that you get buy-in. And again, I'm proud of the Avista team to be able to meet with Bidgely on a regular basis to discuss different use cases, generate use cases, and just collaborate. Because this is a tool that we believe will help us in the future. And it already has. It already has so much just in the short time we've had it. So being able to make sure that we can leverage this in our grid discussions is so critical as we continue to see that giraffe curve, that giraffe neck show up in our industry.
Yeah, and with generative AI, all these AI capabilities are just like growing by leaps and bounds. So I am very positive. It is interesting to see that, in all the use cases you picked, you managed to avoid the loon shots quadrant out here. So, again, that also probably speaks to why you've been so successful, right? Like with these use cases, and it's not that you poured in $100 million and you just saw value for a couple of $1 million out of this. So it's really interesting. So one last thing I want to focus on, considering your experience, not only in terms of executing on multiple use cases, big data and AI use cases, but also deploying them successfully and scaling them across the organization successfully. Can you talk about some of the risks and challenges that, our stakeholders, our attendees should be, cognizant about when they start implementing these solutions? And then more importantly, how do those risks and challenges, how do they influence your decision with regards to picking what AI platform to use in your own, when it came to your own use cases?
Yeah, no, this is a great topic. Unfortunately, I wasn't at Avista when the decision was made to make Bitly, so I didn't get to participate in that discussion. But what's fascinating around it is, when you look back and you talk and you do interviews, you understand that there are several risks and challenges when you start leveraging this. It's, what do our customers think? This is new technology, so do we internally have the buy-in? Do we support what is being done? And at the end of the day, we know that this is a benefit to our customers, and that was the driving factor. Was, we know that customers of the future want this level of insights. So, from the Avista culture, it has been, highly centered around innovation.
Mhm.
And the Bitly culture with innovation really had, it's the perfect partnership when you look at it that way. Is our cultures are so aligned that
Mhm.
we want to sweep our customers off their feet. And we go out and do a lot of community engagements. We're just finishing up a 6-week effort where we've gone to different neighborhoods,
Mhm.
their neighborhood council meetings, and we're spending about 10 to 15 minutes to talk about this subject and to talk about load disaggregation and how it's available for customers today on our myavista.com. And for customers who don't know about it, they're like, you can do that, and it's like, wait a minute, should you be doing that? And then it's, wow, that's amazing, I need to learn more about this. So you go through this range of emotions with customers, which you expect. We did the same thing internally.
Mhm.
So being able to communicate it with those customers, it's something that the customer wants. They may not know it yet, but it's something that the customer wants, especially as we get into high bill seasons and they can see their usage, um, unfold right in front of them. So definitely those challenges are going to be there. They're going to be there for everybody. But as far as picking um, the right AI platform, it's definitely, as long as if it fits within your culture, it's going to fit within your customers.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew. So with that, we have some time for questions. I'll hand it over to Michaela to kind of navigate us through some of the questions here.
Yeah, awesome. And thank you both for your insights. I feel like I've learned a lot over this webinar, and so thank you for that. Our first question is, are you relying on customer input to tell you if they have an EV?
Historically, we were relying on those customers to engage a Vista to let them know whether or not they had an EV. Um, we would do that through buck slip campaigns in our bills or our monthly newsletters, e-campaigns. If you have an EV, let us know. And that wasn't, obviously we saw the success rate of that. We only were gathering close to 25% of those customers.
Right. And I think you talked about this when you're talking about the EV use case, right, Andrew? That you were able to identify only a small fraction of those customers using that, survey input or customer input, but then with the AMI data, I think you would double the number of customers or triple the number of customers you are able to identify using a disaggregation. Isn't that right, Andrew?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So hopefully that answers the question. Are there any other questions in the chat here?
Yes, there are. The next question is, what successful analytical methodologies are used to identify EVs based on AMI data? And are there successful case studies?
Yeah, I can take that one. So at Bidgely, we have been working on we have been using AI for disaggregation of electricity data, and we built this technology more than a decade ago, actually. And fundamentally, what we try to do is pattern recognition. So every appliance, including EVs, has its own pattern with regards to energy consumption. So if you look at it, and then again, we have case studies posted on our website. We are happy to share those case studies, including like we have white papers on disaggregation that explains how exactly it works. But if you think about EVs, the key signature there is one, extremely high power draws compared to like most of the other appliances that lasts for a short burst of about 3, 4, 5 hours, depending on what kind of a charger, of course. But generally speaking, that's the signature that you would look for when it comes to EVs. And then internally, and I think Michaela talked about the previous webinar, we actually dived into some of the specific AI techniques that we use for identifying. So it's not just pattern recognition, but we also create heat maps. We use advanced computer vision algorithms to essentially figure out, when are your EVs charging? What kind of a charger are you using? So we can get a lot of depth of information using that disaggregation, using our advanced pattern recognition and computer vision algorithms.
Awesome. The next question is, how do you distinguish between refrigerator and always-on appliances?
Yeah, I think some of the answer to this question is buried in what I talked about earlier in the context of EVs. Each appliance has its own signature. So the simple example, like a non-electricity example I give is I provide to people typically is, let's say you go from point A to point B, depending on whether you're commuting at 1 a.m. in the night, how quickly you got from point A to point B, et cetera, you can figure out where you biking, where you jogging, was it 1 a.m. in the night, and whether you're returning from the party, where you're driving a car, and so on. So you can use those signatures to distinguish between different types of appliances. And as you train these algorithms, you can make them more and more accurate. And at this point, Bidgely has a very accurate algorithm to differentiate between refrigerators, always-on appliances, electric vehicles, HVAC systems, and so on.
Awesome. Next question is, how do you prioritize your use cases?
I don't know, Andrew, do you want to throw some light on how you prioritize some of these use cases internally, and then maybe I can share my thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. And I think, when we prioritize them, historically it's kind of been, gathering, having a meeting to identify, well, what do we need in order to achieve this? But since we've implemented our Bidgely solution, it's been so much faster than I think anyone has ever expected it to be. Once we have that data, so being able to prioritize it, like I said, I can typically get if I have that list, I can typically return the data within the same day, within hours, typically, to be able to share that out. But we do have goals. If it's more focused on energy efficiency, it just depends on really who's driving that effort and how big of that effort is there. If funding's available for that, then obviously we can prioritize that sooner to execute on. But as far as getting the data to be able to see if it will be a successful use case, we can typically do that within same day efforts.
Awesome. Next question is, for the efficiency analysis, how did Avista define high and low efficiency, and how many variables did you look at to determine the characteristics?
Yeah, that's another great question from Brian. We started looking with Bidgely's help on this. This was something we leveraged with Bidgely, and we start looking at degradation of an HVAC system. So year over year over year, maybe that HVAC system is working harder, staying on longer, and that could be as simple as a dirty air filter. We start looking at saturation. Is it due to poor insulation, or is there leaky doors, leaky windows. How often is the HVAC system cycling? All of those go into play for us to be able to identify high versus low efficiency. And Bidgely has helped us along the way on that. Again, that's where the cross collaboration, those continuous regular meetings with Mary and her team to just talk through it and understand how can we, how can we leverage this to get the better bang for our customers.
Great, next question here, and we're running short on time, but hopefully we can get them all. With EVs, could you also use registration information from other sources?
Yeah, so that's one where we looked at as department. I referred to it as the Department of Licensing. And each state has different requirements and challenges to go through that. That's something we've considered, but we found this platform of not doing registration information. We found this being much faster and least invasive for our customers.
Great, and then next question in the chat is, I assume EV adoption is occurring in more affluent communities. The data shows where you need to focus infrastructure investments. Do you find this creates conflict with CETA requirements to prioritize infrastructure investments in named communities? How has the UTC responded?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it does create conflicts. And I think we're still kind of navigating that to understand how we want to prioritize those investments in those named communities. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge, right? It's a challenge that is unknown when we're generating that use case, and once you get it, that's something that Avista is just gonna have to adapt through to understand how we prioritize that. So I don't have a great answer for that moving forward. But I think that's something that would be a great follow-up discussion on how we navigate that, because this isn't just an Avista challenge. This will be many and most of our peer utilities.
Great. Okay, and then I think our last question here is, if the EV data reveals needed investments in more affluent communities, has this created conflicts with CETA requirements to prioritize investments in named communities? I think that was pretty much
I think that was the same one.
same question, yeah.
Yeah.
So we've answered that. Okay, great. Let me check if there's any other questions. I think we've got them all answered. Great. If you just want to skip to that last screen, Sriram, we'll go ahead and close up the webinar here. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Sriram and Andrew, for your insights and great knowledge. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. What's next is, if you're heading to DTEC in Orlando coming up the end of February, both Sriram and Andrew will be there. Sriram is leading the Utility University session on AI. It's the Monday before DTEC starts. And Bidgely is actually sponsoring the first ever Utility University all about AI, and they're half-day or full-day workshops. So definitely check that out if you're interested. And then Andrew will also be speaking in a session on the 27th. So a reminder to please take a couple minutes to answer that post-webinar survey. And then if you are interested in attending these sessions, we're more than happy to send you a calendar invite so that you don't miss them while you're there. Other than that, thank you everyone for joining. The webinar recording will be shared out tomorrow, so look out for that. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.